thank you so much. I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to colleagues and just hear, work that's happening around STEM education. And I must just say to Helen that I'm one of the students who went into university without having done a single, well, I won't say a single experiment, but the only experiment I ever remember doing was when our teacher put acid inside sugar, and that was about it. So I can attest to what she's saying. And we were just amazed at how the coal started to form. All right, but yeah, so today I chose to talk about the leaky first year STEM pipeline. And I would like to share some thoughts around how we can address this using a holistic, collaborative approach. So looking at the three-stream model of DBE, I'll be specifically looking at the academic component, which is looking at preparing learners for STEM tertiary education. So we all know that for students or learners in high school to access these STEM programs, they would need a bachelor's, national senior certificate or equivalent. More than 60% in STEM subjects is always what is required: mathematics, physical science, life sciences, or IT. Universities also now use admission point scores, and they also use grade 11 scores or results for provisional admission, and also additional criteria apply in other STEM programs. So looking at the 2023 NSC results, we see that the mathematics pass rates increased from 55% to 63.5% in 2023, as well as the physical science pass rates. Those we have seen that increase. Nationally, there was a 14.9% increase in the number of learners who passed both maths and science, with 60% or higher. And these are it's the pool from which we draw into our STEM programs at higher education, universities, TVET colleges, but specifically for universities, this is the target group. So of all candidates who achieved a bachelor's pass in 2023, about 61.9% were from quintile 1 to 3 schools, and while 32.9% were from quintile 4 to 5. So quintile 1 to 3 schools, it's generally the definition that was given by Department of Basic Education to classify schools, to categorize them based on how well-resourced those schools are. So it's good to see that schools which have been categorized as being in poorly resourced areas and schools being poorly resourced themselves, we have seen an increase in the number of students who have passed and qualified to enter university or higher education. So in general, all the provinces recorded an increase in the number of learners who passed both maths and science, with 60% or higher. And this is very important for us, especially programs in natural agricultural sciences, veterinary sciences, health sciences, and engineering sciences. So if we look at the overall picture, you also see that the number of learners who achieved at least 60% in both maths and science increased only for African learners. You can see that increase when the data was looked at. So there are a lot of, it's really comforting to see that students who previously were not performing in these areas, we see some shifts and movement in the right direction. But my question is, I'm very curious to know, and if we had a lot of time, I would have asked the audience just to engage me a little bit on these 3 questions. I'm very curious to know, what explains this increase that we are suddenly seeing? What are the quintile 1 to 3 schools doing differently? What is basic education doing differently? And has the learner profile changed? So maybe we can, if I still have a bit of time left at the end of my talk, we can just come back to these questions to share some thoughts. But my question is, there's always this, coin with 2 sides. There's academic access and success. So this increase that we see, is it enough for academic success? Yes, the high scores in STEM subjects, getting 60% and higher, has managed to ensure access into higher education, particularly for students from quintile 1 to 3, students who were previously, disadvantaged. But the question is, do we see a similar, trend in terms of success? Does this access translate to success? Success, by success, I mean throughput, graduation, and not just graduation, but graduating in minimum time. Because look at the data, I mean, on average, when you look at first-year university, first students, the pass rate for first-year students across South African university tends to be relatively low, often ranging from 50% to 70%. And this lower pass rates, and when we look at the work, I mean, given the work that I'm doing in student affairs and student support, we've seen that the various factors that have contributed to seeing these low pass rates can be, kind of characterized or categorized in terms of some being academic, some being financial, some being social. So if you look at it deeper, if you go deeper in some of the things that I've seen, some of the trends that I've seen in terms of what these factors really are, some of them is due to academic readiness, some personal adjustment on the part of students, the socioeconomic challenges that students face, as well as language barriers can contribute to this leaky first-year pipeline that we see. So if I just go deeper into each of the factors. For example, academic readiness. I've seen in my work that many first-year students struggle with the transition from high school to university, and usually it's due to these, what I call knowledge gaps. Knowledge that you would consider that it's already in place, it's supposed to be prior learning, it's fundamental to these students passing these modules. Such as, programming, coding, calculus. Sometimes it's, knowledge such as being able to succeed in technical drawing if you are in engineering, or even being computer literate or having a certain level of computer literacy to thrive in a computer science program. Right? But then we find that these first-year students arrive and they have such a lot of gaps. They cannot thrive because of these knowledge gaps that are assumed to be in place. Yet they have passed, they have met the minimum requirements in the APS. Nobody did them a favor by coming into university. They come well qualified, but with these knowledge gaps, which then becomes one of the factors that contributes to the leaky first-year pipeline. Socioeconomic challenges we have seen is things like financial difficulties, right? And inadequate housing. We often, I often get a call that a student has been sleeping in the library because they have no housing. They cannot afford private accommodation. They also cannot afford university accommodation, although it's subsidized. And socioeconomic factors, these can really affect the ability of a student to learn and to actively engage in the learning process. Language is increasingly becoming a very strong factor because of the diverse linguistic landscape in South Africa. It means that for many students, English is not their first language, and that's primarily the language of instruction. And this often we've seen can affect comprehension and performance. Hence, you have seen, universities start to make it compulsory for students to take modules such as academic literacy and to take language as well, regardless of whether or not it's a STEM program that they enroll for, because language continues to be a barrier. Support systems also, the fact that are they available, are they accessible to students? Universities are really increasingly investing in support services, what we call wraparound support, in the form of academic advising, supplemental instruction, and mental health services. We've seen a lot of challenges with mental health amongst our first-year students, probably because some of them, especially the high flyers, experience failure for the time. And I remember my previous PhD supervisor, Mariki, used to talk about this analogy of a big fish, small pond. that kind of symbolizes these students when they were in school, but when they come into the university, it's a small fish in a big pond. So some of them struggle to deal with failure. So we found that there's a lot of need for mental health. It takes a knock on their confidence, on their mental health, and it triggers some of them. They may have historic challenges with their mental health, and these come back and they flare up, really impeding and hampering them from succeeding. Personal adjustment also, we found, is also another challenge where for the first time, the students are independent. They need to, have self-discipline, draw up their own study timetable. So the environment is so free that they have a false sense that they are in control until they hit a wall, and that wall often is what we call mid-year exclusions, and they really fail to bounce back from that. So for the University of Pretoria, we have what we call a 3-tiered orientation program. So it consists of a pre-orientation, which is once students are given a form offer before we start the academic year, we open up an online self-paced module, which already helps us to expose them to the learning management system, the support services at UP. And this is now a time when it's not time that at which they compete, where we are competing with class time. It's before the academic year begins, so they can already at leisure look at what the university has to offer. And then we have orientation week, like all other universities, but we also have an extended orientation because we know it can be information overload in the orientation week. So we extend and repeat what has been shared during orientation week through an online, again, self-paced module that runs throughout the first semester. But what I want to draw your attention to is the University of Pretoria Readiness Survey. We have been collecting data through this survey, and so the UP Readiness Survey, it helps us measure the first-year students' readiness for university, and it forms part of our early warning system, if you will. So by immediately when we see the response, we can tell that a student is at risk, and we can refer them early to relevant support services. It is electronically administered during orientation week. So I would like to share a little bit of just draw a picture for you based on the data that we got from this year's survey. We had about 5,400 students, first-year students, complete the survey. That gives you about 63% response rate, which is a good response rate. Majority were female and majority were African students who completed the survey. Now, if you look at the distribution of first-year students, you will see that it really is still talking to the target that we're looking at in terms of STEM programs. The majority of our participants were from the engineering faculty. Excuse me. We had a majority from the economic and management sciences, natural and agricultural sciences, as well as you can also see there in education we also have. So there was a good representations, particularly for the STEM programs in terms of the students who completed our survey. And then if you look at first generation status, we define first generation as a student who in their families, the first to enter into university. We think first generation is very important. It's a factor that we need to look at, because sometimes a student who comes in and is the first in their family to come to university often do not have what we call the social capital. They have nobody to refer to. They have no reference point. I mean, there's language, and vocabulary that is unique to the university environment, like modules that are electives, that are core modules, a lot of the language that they have nobody who has transferred that knowledge to them prior to entering university. So a lot of the things are still all new for them. So when we looked at the data of the participating first years, it was really alarming to see that the majority of first generation students where in the engineering faculty, so the top 5 faculties were in engineering and natural and agricultural sciences, which are also relevant to what we're looking at in terms of the students who are accessing higher education into STEM programs. So the BSc Extended Biological and Agricultural Sciences programs at the University of Pretoria consistently enroll the highest proportion of first-generation students. So this, and as well as the BCom Extended, and this for me, I think speaks volumes in terms of the importance of these extended programs, because it seems they are, that they are necessary for broadening access for students who otherwise would not access STEM programs. So these are very key, and I believe they should continue to be key in higher education. And then if we look at the first generation status and the school quintile, if we combine that, you see that the proportion of first year students participating in the survey from quintile 1 to 3 schools, it decreased by 4%. With the same trend, while the same trend is observed for first generation status by 8%, right, decline. However, the proportion of first generation students from quintile 4 to 5 has increased. And similarly, we see an increase in the number of first years coming from 4 to 5 quintile schools. And the participant students, both first year and first generation from private and international, has also increased. I wonder what this data is telling us. And that's something I was really thinking about, that perhaps you finding students who are first generation and not necessarily coming from well-off homes, being able to access these quintile 4 to 5 schools and private schools. It can be through a variety of ways, maybe scholarships, and I'm thinking about schools that are specifically targeting these kids who are first generation, and such as the Oprah Winfrey School, making sure that they get experience of studying or being prepared for university in a well-resourced environment. So it's very interesting data. The choice of study. And when we looked at the choice of study here, every student, when they apply, they indicate whether they want to do, what is my first choice? What is it that, and we assume often that the first choice is what the students are really hoping to get into. The second choice, they are also asked to indicate as well the third choice, but you can see that in terms of choice of study, 58% of the students are enrolled for their first choice, while 29% are enrolled for their second choice. This, and we have really zoomed into this 29% because it's also a reason for concern. Sometimes when you looked at the data, it's not something to worry about, because we find that the second choice actually still leads to the first choice. For example, students who are in the BSc Biomedical Sciences or Medical Sciences still have a chance to get into medicine, for instance. However, sometimes the second choice is a problem where a student wanted to get into the STEM program, and now the second choice is in theology. So we find that students, the morale is very low. They don't have that motivation to study. They give up. So we have actually now started at the University of Pretoria to proactively look at this data that we collect and identify the students who have been accepted for the second choice, determine, the reasons for that, and support where possible the ones who actually feel like, what, this is it, but it's not really something that I would like to do. In terms of socioeconomic status, 53% of the participants told us that they rely on parents for tuition, and 25% on NSFAS. And the same trend was observed in terms of who they rely on in terms of their daily living allowances, as well as accommodation. For me, I think it's something also to look into, considering the administrative issues we've been having with NSFAS. For example, this year, it was a bit of a nightmare when students were still waiting for confirmation on whether or not they got the funding before they can even register. This meant that some students missed the first year orientation and some only joined halfway through the program when classes had already started, and it had a great impact on these students to an extent where when we looked at the mid-year exclusions for STEM programs, sometimes we just made the decision that if this was a late registered student, let's not exclude. It's just a warning, but also a flag for us to dig deeper and see how we can assist to get them out of the read. In terms of access to device, I mean, right now we know that technology is very key in university. We're using learning management systems. So it's important for students to own some type of device. I mean, for example, some universities have gone even as far as saying you no longer give out hard copy study guides. Everything is electronic, everything is online. There's also hybrid teaching, sometimes classes online, sometimes classes in person. And we always want to find out from students, do you have a device? And it is very, worrying that 81% of the students actually indicated that they own a device that is usable for online lectures. 10% do own a device, but it may not be usable. So maybe it's just a cell phone. 6% saying they do not own a device at all. And this is really something that universities must look into. Computer literacy is also very important in the same vein. And 8% of the students who participated in our survey indicated that they had proficient knowledge in computer literacy. And by proficient, we mean someone who can do coding, programming, very advanced stuff. 24% said they have advanced skills. That is, they can use the internet, they can use the Microsoft suite, but advanced levels. 25% indicated intermediate knowledge. We did explain to them what each of the levels would mean. And 25% said they had basic computing and applications. And then 14% said they had fundamental skills, while 4% said they had never used a computer before. And for me, I mean, it was really, I was very worried when I encountered a student who had never used a computer before. She is, and universities, because they acknowledge that we have modules, computer literacy modules that all first years that have to take, especially in for engineering at University of Pretoria, we're still working on computer literacy modules because we see that increasingly it becomes important. You cannot assume that anyone who's enrolled or admitted for engineering does not come with computer literacy skills. So this student, I mean, the literacy levels were so bad that she's currently failing the computer literacy module, the very module that is supposed to help her develop her skills, which she needs at that time as well to excel in other modules. So everything becomes a domino effect if you don't have these computer literacy skills. So my question is, what can be done post-school? Is there anything we can do as universities with the first years? On a teaching and learning front, and I think Helen and some of the speakers may have touched on this, that we have an opportunity to do something in terms of our teaching approaches, using more active and engaged learning teaching approaches, inquiry-based learning, hands-on labs to link to what Helen was saying just now. But what I also found important was the humanizing pedagogy, especially in the STEM. I don't know, it's my own experience of my old professors that, I think this is something that probably needs to be built into some of our professors in STEM, applying humanizing pedagogy, focusing on understanding students' backgrounds and creating inclusive learning environments for students. It's the maths class should not be scary. The maths professor should not be unapproachable. Staff development is very important, I think, because I think usually we find that professors in STEM, they are they're experts in their disciplines, but they would still need development as university teachers. So this could really help them with better teaching strategies that are more accessible and more inclusive. On the academic support front, a number of things are being done, as I alluded to, the extended curriculum programs, that these are very key in broadening access, and also tutoring, supplemental instruction. We have used a lot of supplemental instruction, for instance, this year as catch-up programs for students who registered late. We also continue to use the supplemental instruction peer assist, where peers, seniors help the first years in programs, or even in addressing those knowledge gaps that are mentioned. These are late afternoon classes because they still need those that fundamental knowledge to still succeed in the modules in first year. As well as very important is early assessment intervention. So early warning systems become very important. And at the University of Pretoria, we invested in a system, and we're still working on a strategic document that could say, at what point do you start to flag risk, and how do you flag it, and who flags it? But one thing that has come through in some of our discussions is that we have learning management systems which professors or lecturers can actually create a grade column to always share even the small scale assessments. But the thing is, when we look at the learning management systems and look at the assessments that are in there and have been indicated by the lecturers, they are also best positioned to give meaning to those scores. So I believe that the professors need to also be part of our referral system. They should be able to inform those scores and be able to click a button that could flag risk either for somebody in student support or somebody in administration early. Psychosocial support as well. Our students are dealing with a lot, as you can see this one, handling so many things. Social integration issues, mental health, food security becomes a problem. We have done a bit of calculation, and we could determine that, for example, at our university, a student on NSFAS can only afford to eat one meal a day only for one semester. So after the second, when the second semester hits, if they haven't managed their meal allowance, they're basically going hungry. So, and these are some of the things that need to be addressed in terms of making sure that students have meal plans that are affordable and that can help them have something healthy and nutritious and filling still within the NSFAS meal allowance. And then comprehensive orientation programs, as I told you, that we have this 3-tiered orientation, the skills workshops, we have academic success coaches, which offer these study skills, because students sometimes feel what made them succeed in high school, that could still be the trick. But we have developed workshops where we retrain them, we give them new skills in terms of studying and comprehending what they're learning. Financial support, we have partnered with a number of companies and corporates. I mean, ISFAP, Michael and Susan Dell, MasterCard. There's a lot of bursaries. Also help our students to perform better so that we make them attractive to the funders, so that alleviates all the, the gaps, that the unmet needs that they often experience. Psychosocial support, as I said, mental health is important. Learning communities become very important, especially for students who find that they feel they don't have a sense of belonging. They don't feel like they belong because of how different the environment is. So learning communities can also be very important. We also have mentorship, where a student would have a mentor throughout their first year, somebody in the same program, but is now a senior, holding their hand and helping them navigate the new environment they find themselves in. And this is just to give you a sense of the framework that we want to use at the University of Pretoria. I mean, we figured out that 60% basically is the key grade. You need 60% to get a place in our accommodation, to get financial aid, to get into our leadership program. So, usually, I mean, what we want to say, we want to make this thing, you know, part of the culture, part of the what we call fly at UP, finish line is yours at UP, to say getting 50% is not enough. You need to aim higher, right? We need to also look deeply into what we call high impact modules, which we have a lot of in the STEM programs. These modules have high enrollment rates, high failure rates, and they hamper progression. So we already have a HIMSS project that looks and drills into these modules, but we also have recently gotten funding to also see how we can bring in psychosocial support and additional support from a student support perspective into HIMSS, not just in looking at the teaching. So we really see all students as being at risk, and that, you know, dropouts are also, you know, students that have been in the system, and there needs to be some form of support for our students who are excluded. They should not just be cut off. There needs to be some kind of, you know, referral or even guidance and career redirection for them to still obtain that degree that they really wanted to obtain. So for me, takeaways is that, I mean, I think we need to mind the gap. We need to strengthen the school and university partnerships, because this is where we can start to understand as universities the type of learner that is coming into our space. And we also do not want to, you know, use a deficit approach. We see our students as having potential and a lot that they can bring into our space to help it transform it even much more, so that it's more, you know, conducive for learning for all types of learners and coming from different backgrounds. And we need to rethink first-year STEM student retention strategies. How do we retain these students? We also need to rethink wraparound support for learners from quintile 1 to 3, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Again, but we need to strike that balance, you know, because sometimes you also do not, you know, want to single out students and offer them so much support that for them it feels like they're being stigmatized. So there's also that challenge that we're having. How do we support them without singling them out? And how do we support these students without also, you know, denying the rest of the students the same opportunities? And I think lastly, we also need to rethink our financial aid models. As I said, you know, we find universities in these very expensive areas in cities where accommodation is expensive. And now when the NSFAS cap on accommodation comes in, it does not take into account the area where the university is, and that the rent for that student that they give is not sufficient. Even at the University of Pretoria, the cheapest residence, with the NSFAS cap, a student still has a shortfall in terms of payment. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah, so I'm done. Thank you.